Reversing the curve, how the country that learned from Kenya can now save us. Section 1, the accidental blueprint, the hook. In the mid-1960s, a team of economic technocrats from Seoul, South Korea, boarded a flight to Nairobi, Kenya. They did not come as donors. They did not come to provide foreign aid. They came as students. At the time, newly independent Kenya was the economic crown jewel of East Africa, boasting an average GDP growth rate of 6.6% and a highly disciplined civil service. South Korea, on the other hand, was a war-torn nation with zero natural resources, a bankrupt treasury, and a GDP per capita lower than Kenya's. The Koreans came to Nairobi to study our early development frameworks, our agricultural cooperatives, and how our ministries functioned. 6 decades later, the wheel of history has completely turned. Today, South Korea is a member of the elite G20, a global engine of technology and industrial export, while Kenya is trapped in a volatile cycle of aggressive tax collection, mounting external debt, and economic stagnation. How did the student outgrow the master so spectacularly? And more importantly, how does Kenya reverse the learning curve? In this video, we are analyzing the profound historical loop between Kenya and South Korea, tracing exactly what they took from us, what they did differently, and the precise institutional blueprints Kenya must now steal back to salvage its economy. Section 2, what they borrowed and what we abandoned. When the Korean delegation looked at Kenya in the 1960s, they saw a nation driven by absolute clarity. Under Economic Planning Minister Tom Mboya and a young technocrat named Mwai Kibaki, Kenya ran on Sessional Paper No. 10 of 1965. This master plan proved that a developing nation could thrive by focusing heavily on 2 things, a domestic resource mobilization and centralized economic discipline. The Koreans took this core philosophy back to Seoul. General Park Chung-hee took the concept of centralized discipline and institutionalized it into a hyper-powerful entity called the Economic Planning Board, EPB. But this is where the 2 nations took completely opposite paths. While South Korea took the idea of economic planning and made it supreme, giving the head of the EPB the rank of Deputy Prime Minister with total control over the national budget, Kenya did the exact opposite over the decades. Kenya slowly defunded and decentralized its planning department, allowing the National Treasury to turn into a short-term tax extraction office, while our county planning frameworks devolved into uncoordinated political pieces. South Korea realized that a nation's tax collectors should never dictate national policy. In Seoul, the economists drew the blueprint, and the Treasury's only job was to fund it. In Kenya, we let the budget write the strategy. Section 3, the private sector mutation, Chaebols versus mismanaged parastatals. The second major lesson in reversing the curve lies in how a government utilizes its industries to generate wealth. In the 1960s and 70s, Kenya successfully built state-backed agricultural engines like the Kenya Tea Development Authority, KTDA, and the Kenya Cooperative Creameries, KCC, to organize local farmers into productive forces. Korea saw the value of organizing productivity, but they realized that state-run parastatals often risk falling into political patronage and inefficiency. So, Korea engineered a different weapon, the Chaebols. These were family-owned private conglomerates like Samsung, Hyundai, and LG. The relationship between the Korean state and these private companies was entirely performance-driven. The Economic Planning Board provided these businesses with cheap credit from state banks and protected them from foreign imports. But there was a strict catch. The state told the corporate leaders, if you do not meet the export targets we set for you, we will cut off your credit and let you go bankrupt. Contrast this with Kenya's trajectory. From the late 1980s onward, our industrial vehicles, like Mumias Sugar, the Kenya National Trading Corporation, KNTC, and our local cooperative unions, were steadily decoupled from technocratic metrics and turned into vehicles for political appointments. Instead of forcing our local industries to become global export champions, we allowed them to become inefficient, debt-heavy entities that required constant state bailouts. Korea used the private sector as a global sword, Kenya used its parastatals as political shields. Section 4, Export or Die, the lifeline of foreign exchange. This brings us to the ultimate macroeconomic divergence, the export mandate. For decades, Kenya's economic architecture has been trapped in a model called import substitution, trying to manufacture goods or grow agriculture just to feed our local domestic market. When we do export, we largely export raw, unprocessed raw materials like bulk tea or raw coffee, leaving the massive profit margins of processing to overseas markets. South Korea's planners realized early on that their domestic population was too poor to drive a massive economic revolution. They adopted a brutal, uncompromising mantra, export or die. The EPB designed sequential 5-year roadmaps focused entirely on foreign exchange. In the 1960s, they exported light textiles and footwear. They took those profits and systematically upgraded in the 1970s to heavy industries like shipbuilding and automotive manufacturing. By the 1980s and 90s, they pivoted into electronics and semiconductors. They didn't wait for a digital economy to magically happen, they planned their way up the global value chain step by step. Korea taxed foreign imports heavily to protect local producers, but kept taxes on domestic manufacturers incredibly low to make them globally competitive. Modern Kenya, by contrast, heavily taxes domestic manufacturers through unpredictable finance bills, while allowing cheap, finished imports to flood our markets. We have completely inverted the formula.
Section 5, the roadmap back to the top, the solutions. Reversing the curve means admitting that the student has become the master, and having the institutional humility to copy what works. If Kenya wants to transition from a debt-heavy, tax-strained economy into a genuine African economic lion, we must implement 3 immediate, non-negotiable structural adjustments from the South Korea blueprint. First, legal supremacy of the economic blueprint. We must completely decouple the State Department for Economic Planning from the National Treasury. The head of economic planning must be legally elevated to an independent, technocratic authority with statutory powers to veto any tax measure or public expenditure that does not align with long-term industrial growth. We must stop letting the KRA's short-term revenue targets dictate our nation's long-term survival. Second, a transition to performance-based private sector incentives. The government must stop trying to solve unemployment through public sector expansion or parastatal bailouts. We must offer aggressive fiscal incentives, including subsidized electricity and corporate tax exemptions, to local manufacturing, agricultural, and tech firms. But these incentives must be legally bound to export performance. If a local firm expands Kenya's foreign exchange earnings, the state backs them fully. If they fail to compete globally, the incentives are withdrawn. Third, structured, sequential industrial upgrading. We must pause the execution of uncoordinated, capital-intensive megaprojects that drain our liquidity overseas. Our economic planning must focus on a phased industrial roadmap. First, mandate 100% local value addition on our agricultural exports, ensuring no tea, coffee, or macadamia leaves Mombasa unprocessed. Second, build localized light manufacturing zones along our SGR corridors. And third, use those accumulated manufacturing profits to systematically fund our digital and technological chassis. Section 6, Outro. The story of Kenya and South Korea proves a profound macroeconomic truth: a nation's destiny is not determined by its natural resources, its foreign aid, or its geographic lack. It is determined entirely by the discipline of its institutional machinery. The fact that South Korea once came to Nairobi to learn from us is not a source of shame, it is a proof of our capacity. The blueprint for greatness is already written in our national history. We do not need to look to Western economic models or Eastern debt traps for answers. We simply need to look in the mirror, remember who we were, and restore the discipline of the plan. What are your thoughts on reversing the learning curve? Do you think Kenya should adopt Korea's performance-based alliance between the state and private exporters? Let's have a structured, data-driven conversation in the comments section below. If you want to see how these planning principles connect directly to our deep dives on the National Treasury crisis, the structural friction inside devolution, and our infrastructure bottlenecks, subscribe to the channel and watch our complete economic architecture series right now. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next analysis.